Hello, it's Wednesday morning, and it's a little bit of a special week since this week we are all gearing up and celebrating the Thanksgiving. So we're gonna have Thanksgiving break to also fit in to our weekly schedule. So for that reason, I really think that this video review session and the lecture videos that I have shared with you on your learning management system both become so important. So what I'd like to do, I'd like to jump without any further ado to the topic at hand, and we will be looking this week the male reproductive system, and next week our focus will be on the female reproductive system. Since we haven't had in-person time, what I will do next week, I will go through everything once again of both systems, but I wanted to at least this week to have a chance to kind of go through the general review of the both. So just kind of to get us started, I think it's going to be useful for us to talk a little bit about some of the basic terminology, some of the basic things that we really need to know when we talk about reproductive systems in general. And let's start with a couple of key terms. So the first term that I want to discuss with you is the term gonad. So gonad refers to the primary sex organs. And we have one for each sexes. So for the males, which is our topic today, it will be, of course, the testes. And for the females, which is going to be our focus on next week, it's going to be our ovaries. And really, if we think of what are the primary functions of the gonads, these are twofold. So often I think that what's really obvious for most is the production of the sex cells. So for the males, this is of course going to be the sperm or spermatozoa. And for the females, it's gonna be our ova or oocyte, so the egg cell. The sex cells are gonna be also sometimes referred as gametes. So you can see either one of these terms being used, and that's just what I wanted to kind of put on your horizon so you won't be thrown off if that happens. There is a second function for the gonads, and I think it's important that we remember this and recognize this. In addition to production of the sex cells, the other thing that gonads do, they produce sex hormones. And this is the time when we really come back to what we saw on the very first chapter of this course, when we talked about the endocrine system and how all these systems, to really understand them in detail, we needed a little more information. So to understand the sex hormone roles, we really needed to wait until here so we can discuss through the reproductive systems. And of course, for the males, the main sex hormones that we're going to be interested are going to be the androgens, and for the females, estrogen and progesterone. All other parts of the reproductive system that we'll have a look of, with the exception of the testes and the ovaries. All other parts are simply going to be accessory reproductive organs. So this is hopefully helpful when you really think what to focus on. And what I was going to do with you today was that we're going to go through the male reproductive system. And as we do that, that allows us to really cover pretty much everything that we need to know about this chapter. So like we have done a few times before, we're going to be using just taking notes together and cover everything through that way. And we're going to start with the male primary sex organ, which of course was going to be our testes. And we remember the testes had a twofold function, like I just mentioned, the production of the sperm and also the production of the sex hormones. So let's draw the testes on this diagram of us that we will prepare together. And I will be using on this chapter a lot of color coding. So if you feel that that's not really your game or that's not the way you learn best, I encourage you to do your own notes. But I think that for my learning style and my teaching style, that's what we're going to be using today. So let's highlight our testes on this diagram, remembering that they're the primary sex organ. So remember, I'm going to be drawing a very schematic representation, so it isn't necessarily as anatomically accurate as we could reach, but it's aimed to highlight the most important things, what you really need to take away from the male reproductive system. And the next part of the male reproductive system that I want to discuss is this structure on top of the testes, really kind of a coiled-like structure that rests on top of the testes. This structure is going to be called epididymis, and the function of it is really to be the site where the sperm produced by the testes goes to mature and to be stored for when it is needed, so for later use. So that rests on top of the testes. I think one student of mine back in the day described it in this way: even sperm has to go to school. So they go there to be stored and mature. And again, my screen is giving me a little bit of trouble, so let's just fix that little error. So I think that that's a good place for us to have listed those two. We want to continue our listing of the key structures and discuss their role in the male reproductive system. And the next one, we're going to have a bunch of possible names for that. And this next structure that we're going to have a look of, just to kind of have some other anatomical landmarks, I'm going to draw a urinary bladder here. And we'll have a look at the urinary bladder a little bit later, how it relates to all these structures. But what we're going to be looking at is going to be one kind of a long tube leaving from the epididymis, traveling over the urinary bladder and then to the back side of it. And this tube has many different names that you can see being used depending a little bit geographically where you are located, but also kind of there is just variation, so these get used interchangeably. So it might be a reflection on the age of the textbook, it might be a reflection on where one has been trained, and so on and so on. But you can consider at this point these terms as interchangeable. So this long muscular tube that carries the sperm from epididymis. Further, you can hear names such as vas deferens or ductus deferens or ductus deferentia being used to describe that. So any of those really would be, I would say, fair game to be used. You probably will wonder, how about you in the exam? Which one should you know? You really should be at least able to recognize all of these names and that they all mean the same thing. So this tube carrying the sperm from the epididymis to the neck structures of the male reproductive tract. So I'll add just to our notes, so we have complete notes, that this is really just a muscular tube. And as you remember, when we talked about the movement of material in muscular tubes earlier on, for example, when we talked about oesophagus, we saw that it was this wave-like movement, peristalsis, that helped to move material along the way. So sperm doesn't have to swim alone this entire journey from the epididymis onwards in the male reproductive system. Also, just the simple structure of this tube will be useful for us, especially in terms of transporting the material there. And what I'm going to do next, we'll notice that at the very end of vas deferens, just after the urinary bladder, we have this kind of an expansion of this tube. So it's just a little bit larger, a little bit wider at this spot. This widening of the tube, if you wish to describe it as such, is going to be known as ampulla. So a structure to identify there. And from the ampulla, we then start to get to the combination of various different kinds of ducts that we have running. And in addition to those ducts, we have then various glands contributing to the secretions that pass within those ducts. So what I'm going to do first, for our purposes, I'm going to draw first all those ducts that we will be seeing. And then we'll add the glands, as I mentioned. So we'll start with the ducts, but there's going to be more important information to come. But I think it's good to have at least a framework of what we will be talking about mapped out for us at this point. So remember, male reproductive system was different from the female. Not only that it's a little bit simpler, but also that large portions are shared between the urinary and reproductive system when it comes to these ducts that we'll have a look. So I'm thinking, where shall I add? And I think that this will be a good spot to add here the names of these ducts. So we're going to start with ejaculatory duct. And ejaculatory duct then changes pretty soon into our urethra. And you remember, of course, urethra from when we looked at the urinary system. So let's highlight both of those just for the sake of consistency and using the same color coding system on this diagram of ours. So we have few branches for this duct, and we'll discuss why these branches are going to be important, because they actually end up to various important accessory glands that add to the secretions. So we want to have paths for those secretions to join. So it is not going to be only just sperm that travels in the semen. There's going to be other elements that get added. And let's start with the first accessory gland here that I want to discuss. This is going to be our seminal vesicle, located right after the ampulla. And if you think about it, at this point, sperm has traveled now a significant journey in terms of the length of the journey that it has to do in the male reproductive system. And like you remember from your very basic introductory biology classes, whenever we are doing some work, so in this case, sperm is swimming along, we need energy. So at this point, the sperm has probably gone through quite a lot of the energy resources that it had. So the seminal vesicle really provides nourishment for this sperm so that it has this energy to keep continuing its journey run. So it's kind of a spot where we're adding a boost of resources for the sperm to continue its journey. What's important to notice at this point is that we are going to have our ducts going through another gland that's going to be important, and we'll discuss a little bit about its clinical function as well. So you'll notice all of these ducts, secretions from the seminal vesicle, the sperm that has reached the ampulla, even the duct that brings the empties the urinary duct or urinary bladder. All of these have to pass through prostate. And what happens sometimes with the prostate is that as you age, prostate may keep growing in size. And as it keeps growing in size, it can actually constrict some of these ducts. And we can have issues with emptying the urinary bladder, with the affecting sexual functions, and so on. So that is something that affects many male as we age. So something to keep on mind. And I'm going to add one more. And I think that I'm going to add the gland here. After the prostate, we have a little gland. And again, we have two names that we might see being used for it. And this gland that I'm going to add here is either going to be called bulbourethral gland or Copworth gland. So both are names that you might see being used. And what the bulbourethral or Copworth gland does, it adds more secretion to the semen, and the secretion really is released in response to sexual stimulation. So this gland releases the secretions in response to that. I think the next thing for us to add, kind of to complete the diagram, if I wish, is two sets of, oops, and I didn't mean to do that, two sets of tissue that swell in response to sexual stimulation. So when man gets an erection, these tissues will receive blood flow, they will get filled with blood, and the penis will get stiffen. So let's add those two here, and I'm gonna add them the name here. And let's just make sure, I think I jumped out of the screen. So what I'm wanting to show you is going to be oops, I didn't mean to do that. I'm clicking away here. I think you should be still able to see my screen, hopefully. So what I'm wanting to show here is going to be the two tissues that I mentioned that in response to sexual stimulation can swell as blood flows to these. So these are going to be our corpus cavernosum and corpus spongiosum. So it's important, if we think of what the ultimate function of the male reproductive system is, it is to deliver the sperm as part of the semen to as far in to the female reproductive system as possible, so that the fertilization can happen there without too long of a journey for the sperm to travel within the female tract. So that's why this stiffening of the external part of the penis. So I think that those cover really all of the key structures of the male reproductive system that I wanted to share with you. Your full lecture video does discuss the sperm. It also does discuss some of the hormones in a little bit more detail, but for our review session this morning, I think that this is a good amount of detail for us to go to. And like I said, I will be extending the due dates for this week's assignments all the way until end of next week. So once we have had a chance to meet in person in a class, that you have a chance to ask any questions that you might have. And I know I still have some messages to catch up on Canvas. So if you have sent me a message, keep an eye. I will definitely get back to you ASAP. And I think that about sums up everything that I wanted to share with you today. I hope you have a very good Thanksgiving and hope that you get to spend time with loved ones. It's been kind of a weird couple of years, so really that family time is important. Please stay safe. Please stay take care of yourself. With that having been said, I'm gonna wrap up this video, and I will see most of you, I hope, if you're watching this recording. I appreciate it if you're joining me. I do offer this session once again in the evening, or I will see you next week in the class. And next week really is the last week when we're doing formal teaching. So we'll go through the female reproductive system. I will also offer a kind of a quick summary of the male reproductive system. And then on our Thursday session, so that previous was on Tuesday session, and on our Thursday session, we will do a dissection of the fetal pig. So it will be a rather busy day on Thursday. So for that reason, I want to make sure that we get through all of the study material on that day. Having said that, I thank you for joining me, and I hope you have a very good rest of the day. Bye.